When people cut everyone off, it is rarely an impulsive decision or an act of emotional immaturity. More often, it is the result of prolonged emotional overload. Imagine a mind that has spent years listening, adjusting, accommodating, and absorbing the emotional weight of others without being truly seen in return. Over time, this imbalance creates a quiet exhaustion. The individual does not erupt in anger or demand recognition. Instead, they withdraw. From a psychological perspective, this withdrawal is not weakness. It is the psyche attempting to protect itself from further depletion. Carl Jung spoke of the psyche's natural drive toward balance. When emotional energy is constantly drained outward, the unconscious seeks correction. Cutting people off becomes an unconscious recalibration, a way of saying, enough, without having to fight or explain. These individuals often reach a point where conversation feels like labor and connection feels like obligation. Silence then becomes restorative. Distance becomes clarity. What looks like cold detachment from the outside is often deep sensitivity on the inside. They step away not because they lack feeling, but because they have felt too much for too long. And here is the truth worth reflecting on. When someone chooses isolation over connection, it is not rejection, it is survival. When someone cuts people off, it is tempting to interpret the act as cruelty or emotional shutdown. But psychologically, it is far more accurate to see it as self-preservation. The human psyche has limits. When boundaries are repeatedly crossed and personal values consistently dismissed, the unconscious begins to intervene, not with aggression, but with distance. Jung understood that the psyche will always protect its integrity when the conscious mind fails to do so. In this sense, cutting people off is not a rejection of others, it is an attempt to rescue the self. Many individuals were never taught how to set healthy boundaries. Instead, they learn to tolerate discomfort, to remain silent, to adapt. Over time, this creates inner conflict. The mind recognizes the harm, but the personality lacks the tools to negotiate it. Withdrawal then becomes the simplest and safest solution. It ends the internal struggle without confrontation. This is why such individuals often feel relief after walking away, even if loneliness follows. The relief comes from reclaiming psychological territory that was slowly being lost. And this leaves us with a crucial reflection. If separation becomes the only form of self-respect someone knows, perhaps the deeper work is not learning to endure more, but learning to protect the self before withdrawal becomes necessary. There is another layer to this withdrawal that is rarely discussed, and it lives in what Jung called the shadow. When emotions like anger, resentment, disappointment, or grief are not consciously expressed, they do not disappear. They move inward. The shadow does not argue, explain, or negotiate. It withdraws. For many people, distance feels safer than rejection because rejection requires confrontation. And confrontation risks exposing emotions they were never allowed to show. These individuals often learned early in life that expressing negative feelings led to conflict, guilt, or abandonment. So the psyche adapted. Instead of saying, "You hurt me," it learned to say nothing at all. Over time, this pattern becomes internalized. When emotional tension rises, the shadow takes control and chooses disappearance over dialogue. Not because the person lacks courage, but because the unconscious associates expression with danger. From the outside, this looks like emotional coldness or indifference. Internally, it is a complex act of self-control. The person is managing emotions so powerful. They fear what might happen if they surfaced. Jung warned that what remains unconscious controls us. When the shadow is ignored, it does not speak, it acts. And here is the reflection. If you find yourself choosing distance again and again, it may not be strength or weakness guiding you, but an unacknowledged part of yourself asking to be understood. When people finally cut everyone off, it is rarely because of a single moment of betrayal. The psyche does not make life-altering decisions impulsively. What appears sudden from the outside is usually the final point of a long psychological accumulation. Trust erodes quietly. Each small dismissal, each broken promise, each moment of being emotionally overlooked adds weight to the unconscious. Over time, the mind begins to record patterns rather than incidents. Jung emphasized that the psyche is a historian. It remembers not just what happened, but how often it happened. When disappointment becomes predictable, trust no longer feels rational. It feels dangerous. At this stage, the individual may still hope things will change, but internally, the foundation has already cracked. They stay longer than they should, not because they are unaware, but because they are trying to reconcile reality with attachment. The final withdrawal is not emotional overreaction. It is emotional clarity. It is the moment when the psyche concludes that explanation will not restore respect. Walking away becomes the only way to preserve dignity. And this is the uncomfortable truth. People who leave without warning usually gave many chances without being heard. If there is one reflection to carry forward, it is this: betrayal is rarely loud, but its accumulation is powerful enough to silence even the most patient soul. For many who cut everyone off, solitude is not chosen because it is ideal, but because it is predictable. Explaining pain requires trust. The belief that one's inner experience will be received with care rather than dismissal. When that belief has been violated repeatedly, the psyche begins to calculate risk. Silence, then, becomes safer than speech. Jung understood that the mind seeks environments where it does not have to defend its reality. These individuals often reach a point where words feel insufficient. They have explained before, clarified before, and opened themselves before, only to feel misunderstood or minimized. Over time, the effort to articulate pain begins to feel more exhausting than the pain itself. So they stop, not out of apathy, but out of self-respect. Solitude removes the burden of translation. There is no need to convince, justify, or soften one's truth. This is why isolation can feel peaceful, even when it is lonely. Peace comes from no longer negotiating one's emotional boundaries. Jung might say that the psyche retreats when expression threatens its coherence. In silence, the individual regains a sense of inner order. The reflection here is simple but demanding, Zai. If speaking your truth feels dangerous, the problem is not your voice, but the environment that taught you silence was safer than honesty. When someone cuts everyone off, it may look like an ending, but psychologically, it is often a pause. Isolation, in this context, is not hatred turned outward. It is attention turned inward. Jung believed that periods of withdrawal are essential to individuation, the process of becoming whole. When external relationships collapse, or are consciously abandoned, the psyche creates space for self-examination. This is not regression, it is reorganization. During these periods, individuals are forced to confront parts of themselves that were long ignored: their unmet needs, their suppressed anger, their fear of abandonment, and their neglected values. Without distraction, the inner world becomes louder, and while this can be uncomfortable, it is also profoundly transformative. The goal of isolation is not permanent solitude, but clarity. Only after understanding who they are without constant external influence can a person return to relationships with discernment rather than dependency. This is why many people emerge from isolation with fewer connections, but stronger ones. They no longer seek attachment to fill emptiness, they seek alignment. Jung warned that avoiding inner work leads to repetition. Isolation interrupts that cycle. It demands reflection before reconnection. The closing thought is this: if isolation has entered your life, do not rush to escape it. Listen to it. What you discover there may determine the quality of every connection that follows.